Hi, everyone. Welcome to our May meeting for the Free Press Book Club for the Accidental Veterinarian. My name is Erin Lebar. I'm your book club admin, and I am an audience engagement manager at the Free Press. Just do a quick round of introductions before we get started. We have columnist Jen Zoratti hosting today. We have Chris Hall from McNally Robinson. And of course, we have our author, Dr. Philipp Schott. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Before we continue any further, I would like to do our land acknowledgement. All four of us are joining you from Winnipeg, which is Treaty 1 territory, the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, Dakota and Dene people, and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. I am having a few technical issues tonight, so bear with us if the video gets a little bit choppy. I'm doing everything I can to make it smooth sailing for the night. That said, things will go as normal. Chris is going to do his introduction. We'll go into the Q&A, and then we'll talk a little bit about next month's book. So with that, I will throw it to Chris to do his introduction.
Thank you, Erin. So back in late 2018, I received advanced word of a new book written by a local veterinarian called The Accidental Veterinarian. It was due in April of the new year, so we started to plan a launch and other marketing activities immediately. And as word spread among the staff, a phrase started to repeat itself. Hey, that's my vet. It slowly dawned on me that we didn't just have a book on our hands written by a vet, but we had one written by everybody's vet. Any veterinarian who is going to write a book must deal with the ghost of James Herriot. Philipp takes care of that issue right off the bat in his book by giving Herriot the first words in his epigraph. And I was struck by the notion of the veterinary business being a people business that happens to involve animals. And it seems to me that that's the perpetual charm of James Herriot. He is connected to the people of his community, and the animals are the enablers of those connections, but it's the people who are the main characters. So if his first book surprised many pet owners, it's no longer a surprise to see a new book from Dr. Schott on the horizon. He followed up his debut with a novel called The Willow Wren, and then a few months later, we received more tales from the Accidental Veterinarian, pardon me, called How to Examine a Wolverine. This spring, he's just released a new mystery called 54 Pigs, first in a series starring mystery-solving vet Dr. Bannerman. And I have already received word of even more tales from the Accidental Veterinarian due in the fall, called The Battle Cry of the Siamese Kitten. Wow, where does he find time for all the animals? So we'll get to those questions and more. And I will also be holding him to account for forever changing the words fire hose and pudding for me. But before we get to that, I will ask Philipp Schott to read from The Accidental Veterinarian.
Thank you very much, Chris. So yes, The Accidental Veterinarian. It's hard to pick something to read, so I'm going to be really kind of weak and lame here. I'm just going to read the very first story, and then if there's time, I'll read the very last story. They're random, and you can read them in any sequence is the idea. There's not really a narrative flow. So from part one, The Making of a Veterinarian, Bobo the Christmas Gerbil. Like most children, and almost every veterinarian, I was fascinated with animals from a very young age. And like most children, my fascination spawned a relentless campaign to obtain a pet. My parents were, however, not pet people. Far from it. My parents didn't have pets growing up. It was war-torn Germany after all. There were many other priorities, such as survival. And none of the people they knew once we immigrated to Saskatoon had pets. It simply wasn't part of their world. They didn't view pet ownership as a bad thing, necessarily, but it was something other people did, like line dancing or cross-dressing. A dog was so clearly out of the question that I never actually dared to ask. And I understood that the suggestion of a cat would be received no differently than the suggestion of a warthog or a rhesus monkey. So I set my sights lower and began the work of building up the Mongolian gerbil as the ideal pet in my parents' mind. This prolonged effort had no discernible effect whatsoever until Christmas of 1977, when a large rectangular object covered in by a decidedly non-festive gray tablecloth appeared under the tree. I had more or less given up on the gerbil campaign by that point. I was actually afraid that the large rectangular object would be a gigantic mechano set as part of my father's own campaign to get me interested in something practical. But no, to my astonishment, the object revealed itself to be a cage, a large cage, hand-built by my father out of heavy gauge 1-inch galvanized steel mesh. This cage was solid. It appeared to be designed to help its occupant withstand earthquakes, tornadoes, mortar attacks, and significant civil unrest. But there was no occupant. Oh, wow, thank you. It's an empty cage. My parents peered closely at the cage and then looked at each other. There had been a gerbil in there just a half an hour ago. Now there was no gerbil. My father, the physicist, expressed astonishment and disbelief that a gerbil could pop through 1-inch mesh, but pop through it evidently had, like a button through a buttonhole. The remaining gift openings and assorted Christmas rituals were abandoned and the hunt was on. 2 bewildered adults and 2 manic children scoured the house until eventually the gerbil was found, pooping silently in a corner under a cabinet. Incidentally, as an aside for the uninitiated, a Mongolian gerbil is a small desert rodent. I first wrote desert rodent and it slipped through the spell checker. With tan-colored fur and a long tail ending in a fuzzy tuft, a bit like a lion's tail. They bite a lot less than hamsters and they stink a lot less than mice. As soon as the gerbil was captured, my father set to work covering the cage with fly screen. This was effective for a day or 2, but then the gerbil chewed through the fly screen. It was patched and patched again, but the gerbil was nothing if not relentless. What eventually put a stop to his repeated escapes were sunflower seeds, or more precisely, the morbid obesity caused by the continuous intake of high-fat sunflower seeds. He had soon become unable to squeeze his bulk through that mesh anymore, so he stayed in the cage, exchanging his freedom for tasty snacks, a trade-off familiar to Doritos addicts everywhere. Over time, the gerbil and I became close, or more accurately, I should say that I became close to him. For his part, I think it's safe to say that the gerbil was largely indifferent to me, or really anything other than his sunflower seeds. I originally named him Burble, but this morphed into Burbo and then Bobo, which is ultimately the version that stuck. Eventually, Bobo died and was not replaced. The cage ended up in the basement with the suitcases and the old coffee makers and was forgotten until one bitterly cold January morning when my father found a pocket gopher, an essentially blind burrowing animal that should have been hibernating, but was out wandering in disoriented circles on a snowy field. My father dusted off the cage and then, to our collective astonishment, walked out onto the field to scoop up the surprised rodent. Failing to recognize the good deed, it bit him savagely, but my father persisted and brought him inside and placed him carefully in the cage. Ultimately, over the course of the next 3 or 4 months, he and the pocket gopher developed a peculiar and it seems mutually beneficial relationship. The gopher was released in the spring and the cage never saw use again. In my mind's eye, I picture it in some deep substratum of the Saskatoon landfill, intact, unbroken, still sturdy like the day my father built it. Do we have time for another? I can read.
Absolutely, go for it.
Yeah, okay. So we'll go to the end. And again, it's not in any particular sequence. It's just, I'm not sure actually how we picked the order of the stories, but anyway. I'm going to read About a Duck. It's actually one of my very favorite patients. His name was Puddles. His photo still hangs on the wall above my desk and actually does to this day. Our relationship began, like so many, with a phone call from a client. Philip, Mrs. Wickland is on the phone. She wants to know whether you'll see a duck. That immediately got my attention. To be honest, I sometimes only half tune into what I'm being told as I attempt to catch up on my office work by ineptly multitasking. I put down my pen and turned to face the receptionist. Did you say a duck? Yeah, a duck. I picked up the phone. Hi there, Dr. Philipp Schott speaking. I understand you have a duck now? Yes, his name is Puddles. I got him for my daughter. The house was so empty after Al and Bandit died. Al was her husband and Bandit their dog. Al had been an interesting guy and was always one of my favorite clients. He was short and round and had a gravelly voice. He was probably in his 60s, and you could tell he used to be quite muscular. He told me that he'd once been a biker, and that if I ever needed help dealing with a difficult client, I should ask him because he still knew some guys who would straighten things out. I limited my response to a smile and a nod. He also wanted to know whether he could volunteer to walk dogs for us at Christmas. We didn't have any patients stay over that Christmas, and then Al died of cancer the next year. It turned out that there was nothing wrong with Puddles the duck, and that Mrs. Wickland just wanted him to get a checkup. So I read up on ducks as best I could in advance, and then on the appointed day, Puddles waddled in the front door, herded gently by Mrs. Wickland. Puddles was a standard white farm duck. Have you ever been up close to one? They are surprisingly large. He was easily 10 pounds, and when he stood tall, he reached halfway up my thigh. Now imagine the scene in the waiting room. A half dozen clients, a couple of dogs, a couple of cats, and in walks a duck. You could pretty much see the pupils of the cat's eyes dilate from across the room. One dog was indifferent, but the other, a little Cairn Terrier, began barking furiously until the owner settled him down. But Puddles was as cool as a proverbial cucumber. He ignored everyone, let out a few soft quacks, strutted, a waddling kind of strut, mind you, about the waiting room, and generally assumed the air of having claimed the place. The examination went well, despite Puddles' clear indignation at aspects of it, and I was able to pronounce him healthy, although I was at pains to make clear to Mrs. Wickland that I was far from being a duck expert. The years went by, and Puddles came in regularly for his checkups, and once or twice for relatively minor foot and skin issues. I always looked forward to his visits. I shouldn't play favorites among my patients, but he was definitely a favorite. He was treated like a rock star by the staff and the other clients, and his arrival never failed to spark delighted gasps. Then one day, Mrs. Wickland called to say that Puddles wasn't well. He had been eating less and less, and his bowel movements were much wetter than normal. When I looked at him, it was obvious that he had lost weight, and he wasn't nearly as feisty as he usually was. Also, it became clear that it wasn't watery stool she had seen, but excessive urination mixed with the stool. We ran some tests and determined that his kidneys were failing. He was 8 years old at that point, which is elderly for a duck. We struggled along with a few attempts at treatment, as Mrs. Wickland wasn't ready to say goodbye yet, but nothing made any difference. With tremendous sadness, one blustery March day, we let Puddles go. Spring is a busy time, so despite his celebrity status, I soon stopped thinking about Puddles until 6 months later when Mrs. Wickland phoned. I hadn't spoken to her since the day of the euthanasia. She had trouble keeping emotion out of her voice, but she wanted reassurance that she had done everything she possibly could for him. She missed him terribly, and she always would. Love is blind. It is blind to gender, color, age, shape, religion, and it is absolutely blind to species.
Oh, Puddles. That one really got me too when I was reading this book. Just like total unexpected fan favorite Puddles.
That's the top, yes.
I want to start, Philip, by talking about your use of humor, because this book is so funny, it's so touching, it's so heartwarming. Tell me about the use of humor, because you are often writing about difficult subjects. I mean, you have to deal with putting animals down, loved ones of family members, dealing with all these complex things. Tell me about the use of humor and if that was intentional, and kind of, is that something that you use to sort of get through your practice? Or
it's intentional / accidental in a way. It's just the way I talk, and it's the way I behave. And it's not, it's not always a good thing. I sometimes will make light of things that I shouldn't maybe make light of, but it's kind of a stress coping response, I think. And I had written this originally, about half these stories in this book came from a blog, and the ones with the stories with a humorous element to them got a lot more response from readers. So it's also, you get kind of nudged in that direction.
Yeah. And I mean, if you can't laugh at, poop and pee, like, for you. Tell me a little bit about starting the blog and what made you kind of, being a vet was your day job. Yeah. Writing was something that you like to do as a hobby. When did you start blogging about your day job? And when did you sort of realize that that was sort of a mine for content and for things that people might be interested in reading? Yeah,
it was a funny journey because I'd always completely separated work from what I did in my spare time. And veterinary medicine it's like a monster that can eat your life if you allow it to. A lot of professions are that way, right? If you allow it into your personal life, it can completely take over. So I kind of constructed this firewall. So on this side, on the writing side of the firewall, when I started having enough time, the kids were a little older and so forth, I'd cut back, I practiced a bit. At that point, I was just working 4 days a week. I started blogging about travel. I travel a lot. Man, the blog, it didn't really do very much. And you want people, you do it to write, but you also want people to read it, right? It doesn't have to be a lot of people, but some would be good. I blogged about whiskey a little bit. I still do a little bit about Scotch whiskey, but also that didn't, and I'm not sure. I don't remember the day or the instant. I wish I had a colorful anecdote for you there, but it occurred to me that what I do in my day job is actually really interesting to people. Like, people would ask me about various aspects of veterinary medicine. People seemed fascinated. I thought, that might be a, a seam versus worth mining. And it was. And I realized, wow, veterinary medicine is a story engine. Like, it just generates stories like you wouldn't believe. So, so once I made my peace with kind of merging those two aspects of my life, and that hasn't been a problem. Actually, that's been a really good thing. So yeah, that's how that came about. Long-winded.
Well, and I think it just, talking about the kinds of stories it generates too. It's evident in the book as well. Like, they are funny stories. They can also be really sad stories. They can also be really difficult stories. And, so writing about some of the more serious topics, like, the black coat, for example, and having death be so part of your job. Was that difficult to kind of articulate it in a different space? Because I know I would imagine that when you're working, it's, you are at work, so you're kind of consumed with the task at hand, but reflecting and thinking about it.
It is difficult. First of all, I didn't want to bum people out. It's like but trigger warnings, when the audiobooks are done for any of my books, you have to write in advance trigger warnings for the voice actors that are going to read it, because some of the stuff is heavy, and if you've just been through that yourself, you don't necessarily want to encounter it right on. But it's necessary. I mean, I really wanted my idea was, I think veterinary medicine is mysterious to people. Lots of things are mysterious to people. Probably journalism is mysterious to people, I would assume. So to pull the curtain back and be absolutely frank, like, there's nothing to hide. This is what it's actually all about: the good, the bad, and veterinary medicine in particular. I mean, every emotion comes through the door every day. There's in the newest collection coming out in the fall, I've got a story about the emotional slot machine. It's like every time you walk into an exam room, you pull the slots. And it's, rather than fruits, it's emojis that come up. Is it going to be crying emojis? Is it going to be laughing emojis? Is it going to be frightened emojis? I mean, it's everything. You name it. Even the poo emoji, that comes up a lot, actually. So.
I bet. Yeah, it's and I think also too, it's something that, I mean, an overwhelming amount of people, I think, have either owned pets or, have had them in their lives, and so they've gone through this before, or they've yet to go through it with their own, or all those. So I think it is interesting for people. And to your point about like the pulling back the curtain piece, those are always the stories at the Free Press that we do, where we can pull back the curtain of someone else's profession. Always do super well, because it's interesting, right? But when you're in it, sometimes you're like, oh, it's just my job. It's everything. But
people have preconceptions, right? Veterinary medicine, all professions have preconceptions. We have a lot of preconceptions about other professions, and I know veterinary medicine people think they really maybe don't understand some of the heavy bits, and some of the complexity and so forth. It's not just playing with kittens. So.
Yeah, it's a good segue actually into a question I wanted to ask about the burnout and suicide piece, because I know we talk about that a lot with medical doctors, especially lately owing to the pandemic. But and I think it was one of those preconceptions that I had too. I was surprised to see it, because I think you're right. I think people think like, oh, being a vet is such a happy job most of the time, but those are real issues there too.
Yeah, no, it's a dream job for lots and lots of people. I mean, not a week goes by where I don't meet somebody who says, I always wanted to be a vet. And you go into a group of second graders and they want to be, astronauts, firefighters. Well, a lot of them want to be Instagram influencers, but veterinarians is like top 10 always. So people do have an idea that because it's a dream job for a lot of people, that it's instant happiness. But it's tough in part because of the type of people it attracts. Most of us are introverts. We're not people. And then we get shoved into this profession, we went into voluntarily. We're in this profession that actually is a people profession that just, we were talking about this earlier before we're on camera. It's a people profession that happens to involve animals, not an animal profession that happens to involve people. And if you can't make your peace with that, you're going to be super, super stressed out. And it's also a business. A lot of them are like, they're small businesses. We have no training in that. We've got to manage staff and deal with inventory and all this stuff. It's just, it's a little overwhelming. So that said, I mean, it's been wonderful for me, it's wonderful for me, and it is wonderful for lots, but the suicide rate is the highest among all professions. The burnout rate is extremely high, especially now coming through the pandemic. We're all overwhelmed. It's a lot of tough aspects to it, but there's kittens too.
But there are kittens too.
Fluffy ones. Yes.
When did you kind of decide that, hey, maybe I have a book on my hands?
Yeah, so I was pitching various in my mind, not actually pitching. I always wanted to write, this is the thing. And this the story of the accidental veterinarian, how I accidentally became a veterinarian. I never had any dreams of becoming a vet. I barely knew what it was. The gerbil never went to the vet, never did end up getting a dog or a cat until I was an adult. So I always wanted to be a writer. My dad said, no, you have to get a profession. You really should get a profession. You're going to starve. So it was always in the back of my mind that I wanted to do it, and I had these various book ideas. And then, as I said, I got that blog going. And at some point it occurred to me that maybe the blog is popular. It's doing well. And when you've not gone through the publishing process before, I think it just seems very intimidating. Like, oh, I've got to steel myself. I have to be in a good place emotionally that I'm going to get these 100 rejection letters. So I sent this off, and like 20 minutes later, I got an email back from the publisher saying, oh, can you send me more? I thought, okay. So I guess I have a book here. Just good luck. Just happened to hit the right publisher at the right moment.
And now you have 2 more that have followed this one. This is the first of your...
Yeah, the vet story collections, and there's the novel, and then the mystery book as well. I think I when I wrote The Accidental Veterinarian, I thought, okay, that's it. I've told my 60 best stories. Good, done. Time to write a sci-fi or something. I haven't done that, but there were more. And then after the second one, I thought, okay, that really is it. But there were more. I think it might be it now. I think I would need hypnosis and have false memories implanted to come up with so many more stories. There are only so many interesting things that happen, but there's a limit. Listen.
But there is obviously animals specifically that stand out to you that make their appearances as characters through the book. So you know about Puddles, that Chihuahua that took a chunk out of your finger.
Yes.
How do you, you must see so many people's pets day to day. How do you remember them all? And do you find that you remember the pets more than their corresponding human?
It depends. Depends on the pet and depends on the human. So certainly a lot of colorful people come in, and I remember those, and not necessarily their pet if the pet is just well behaved and healthy. In fact, I don't know whether it's in this collection or the next one, I don't recall now. If I recognize you in the park, either you're at the vet's way too much, or there's something unusual about you. Because otherwise, it's lots and lots and lots, and I don't remember them. But I've got a pretty good memory overall. So certainly I have memories for the stories. The names were easy because I just made them all up. Puddles is actually Puddles. That's one of the few names I kept that was the actual real name of the animal. But otherwise I changed a few details because I don't feel like I want to call people out on what happened to their pet.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that if some of them were pseudonyms.
Yeah, they're all pseudonyms, and then certainly I've had clients speculate, oh, is that story about me? And I said, maybe, I don't know.
But I guess if you're the one person with a duck, like you.
Yeah, exactly. That's disguise that one.
I wanted to ask, sort of get into I have some reader questions, but I wanted to ask about some of the myths and misconceptions you wanted to talk about. Specifically, I'm curious if you've noticed, and we've noticed this through the pandemic with people, but have you noticed anti-vaccination with pets and people being reluctant to vaccinate their animals?
I mean, it's always been there a little bit in the background, but not so much. We probably now we're seeing a selected sample of clients, right? So there's probably people that never go to the vet, and so I don't know. I don't know what the denominator of that number is.
Yeah.
But no, not so much really. There's a little bit of pushback at times, but it hasn't increased through the pandemic, and it's not a huge topic of conversation. I have a I do have a story about that, about a person who came in and they didn't believe in vaccinating. And then, talked about the various reasons why people might not want to vaccinate their pet. You want to be respectful of people's opinions, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I have to advocate for the animal too. So I'm usually pretty straightforward about saying, well, I don't know, I've administered tens of thousands of doses of vaccine and nothing bad's ever happened. And then we've eliminated diseases like parvo was an epidemic in the 70s, a pandemic for pets, so an epizootic, we call it, that killed thousands and thousands of dogs. Hardly any dogs die of parvo anymore. Every now and then there's an outbreak in a remote community because there's no vaccines there. So it's pretty easy to refute. But it's a belief system for people, so the facts don't actually matter that much.
Well, and I'm sure that, what you do attracts different belief systems because people just don't know. Like your joke about the suggesting dentistry to people, it's like suggesting Spanish guitar lessons for your dog,
That's right.
which was precisely my reaction when I found my dog had to get 7 teeth taken out.
Yeah.
But it's just, I don't know, right? So it's, I'm sure that's also part of your job too, is just education. And
it is going to educate people for sure. Yeah, you can't expect everybody to know everything, and people are steeped in the culture they come from and what their parents told them and their friends told them, and so that's what we get paid for. That's what we're there, is to we're not just dispensing exactly what people have come in to ask for. We're also there to educate and advocate for the animal again.
I also really loved your Stoics and Cassandras essay, because I have a Stoic at home, a little Maltese. He will not tell you if he's in pain. But I've also known Cassandras in my time. So I wanted to ask you how you kind of noticed that and how you came up with that.
Yeah, well, it's common. It's really common, So the Stoics are more common than the Cassandras, and the Stoics give us a lot of grief, because it's not a day goes by where I don't have somebody say, oh, I don't think he's in pain, he's not crying, or that's a huge misconception. In fact, most animals, is in nature, generally, an animal that's wounded isn't going to draw attention to itself, right? An animal that's not doing well is going to try and go undercover and be quiet and withdraw. That's much more common. The Cassandras are just, honestly, if I can say this, if I don't have clients out there who have this pet and feel insulted, but they're very annoying, because just trying to, okay, I'm not going to hurt you, I promise. It's screaming at me, and I just let me do this little thing.
Is it possible for one animal to be both a Stoic and a Cassandra? Because if so, I have that one.
Oh yeah, really? It just depends on the circumstance or the.
Correct. He is a major Cassandra when nothing is wrong, but when something's wrong, he doesn't say a word. So he's both.
And the animals don't get it, right? They don't know what we're about, what we're after, what's expected of them in these situations. So they just fall back on what feels comfortable to them, which.
I have some reader questions. The first one is, I was interested in the financial details you shared about veterinary practices. Do you think large corporate practices will become the norm over time?
Yeah, so we've got a little bit of crystal ball on that, because Europe is ahead of the curve on this. The UK has had corporate veterinary medicine about at least a decade longer, at least more aggressively than we have. And they apparently have topped out at about 80% of the practices, and that seems to be the ceiling. So that's a figure that's often proposed, that about 80% of practices will eventually become corporate. I've got in the second book there, I've got a story about corporate practice and my opinion on corporate practice. I don't like it, but then I'm an old guy, right? So relatively speaking, maybe I'm a dinosaur, but yeah, it brings some positives. I want to be fair, but there's certainly significant negatives as well, I think, but that's just me.
Another reader question. The bond between human and animals is truly one of the most unique and special things in this world. But why do you think humans get so attached to animals? What is it about the human-animal connection that makes it so extraordinary and different from all other connections we experience and make throughout our life?
Yeah, good question. So I think there's quite a few different things going on. So we are a social species. We really want to connect. And animals provide us with a pretty easy connection. They don't demand very much of us compared to humans. So the things they demand are relatively easy to give, and they don't talk back to us and criticize us. They're always happy to see us, all those sorts of things. We've all had this experience with those of us with dogs that the dogs, let's say those of us with dogs and children. So when our kids are small, when they're 2 or 3, they come running to the door, daddy, 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 when you come home. That ends, right? But the dog, as long as he's able to still move, is likely to still come to the door and just be delighted, like delighted. And maybe it's a shallowness in our species that we respond to that kind of adoration, but there's that. And then there's, I think, also this need to reconnect with some element of nature. I mean, we're so removed, even people living in the country on farms and so on, they're still very removed from the way our hunter-gatherer ancestors lived. I mean, most of our, like 95% of our evolution was in an entirely different environment, and with a much deeper connection with animals in the natural world. So this is something that brings the natural world right into our homes. So I think there's something right in the core of our DNA that makes us seek that out.
That reminds me of Nora Ephron had a quote about that, about how when your kids are teenagers, you should get a dog so that someone is still happy to see you when you get home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chris, any questions that you wanted to ask?
Absolutely. Yeah. I wanted to ask, and a couple of readers have also asked about your mystery novel, and was it a kind of natural offshoot? Are you a mystery fan? And is it a series? And what's it about?
So yeah, it's a series, 6 Ostriches. The sequel to 54 Pigs is in the pipeline, just going through the editorial process. It'll be out. It's released this next April. And I've just started work on the 3rd one. Yes, not a huge mystery reader. I read quite broadly. I read lots of fiction, like literature, and I read lots of nonfiction, like pretty heavy history stuff and philosophy and so on. Not a lot of mystery, but I've always enjoyed lighter mysteries. And this is a lighter mystery. Somebody's tagged it as a cozy mystery. I didn't know that was such a thing, but others have said, no, it's only cozy-ish because there's a little bit of violence and a little bit of swearing, but just
nobody knits.
What's that? Nobody knits, and
nobody knits.
No tea is being drunk though. There's tea.
Oh, okay. Well, that's close enough.
So, Tony Hillerman, for those people who remember back in the 80s and 90s, is Joe Lepore Navajo Reservation Mysteries. That was an inspiration, and certainly Alexander McCall Smith is Ladies #1 Botswana Detective Agency, and a bit of an inspiration. But I want to explore character and place, particularly in Manitoba, and the best way to do that is with a series, it seems. Like it just allows just more scope for things to evolve over time. And a mystery sort of naturally lends itself to series format. The mystery itself is just what drives the plot. But the fun part for me to write is all the other stuff, the characters and the location and so forth. So yeah, that's where that came from. And the 54 Pigs, it starts with an exploding swine barn. And I had this image in my mind. It just popped completely unbidden, like these things happen, right? You're walking, you're driving, I don't recall what it was. And suddenly I had this mental image of a veterinarian at a rise looking out over the land, rural Manitoba, and sees this swine barn explode. And then I thought, that would be a really good way to cover up a murder. So this doesn't give much away. You find this out right at the beginning of the novel, that actually it's not just dead pigs in there. There are some human remains. And then I thought, well, what's the veterinarian's perspective on this? How is he involved in any way? And then it occurred to me that veterinarians are like detectives, right? So we also solve mysteries. We solve medical mysteries, but much more so than human doctors, who can access bazillion specialists and fancy machines that go bing and so on. We are far more limited for a variety of reasons in veterinary medicine. So much like a detective is. And like detectives have to deal with uncooperative witnesses, and we have to deal with uncooperative patients that don't talk. So yeah, I thought, okay, there's some parallels there. So
I'm seeing a lot of parallels again. Maybe I'm just obsessed with James Herriot. And I mean, I was struck how you opened with James Herriot. I was thinking of James Herriot before I even opened the cover. Right. And then it sounds like Dr. Bannerman's a small town vet, so start to see connections there. How big, and yet I did notice when you do talk about James Herriot in the book, you say it had a different effect on you than it does on everyone else. So what I guess, what role does he play in your writing?
So again, not having grown up in the veterinary environment, not having wanted to be a veterinarian, barely knowing what that was, I was introduced to Harriet pretty late in life. And so when I finally figured out through this accidental process, which you have to read the book to find out about what that was, I thought people kept saying, "Oh, you must have read Harriet," or "I'm sure you read Harriet." So, no. So when I did, then finally I thought, okay, this is an obligation. I enjoyed it. I mean, he's a wonderful writer, a wonderful storyteller. But I was really frightened by the amount of work that was involved. Wow, no, but whether I'm hardworking enough. And, it's different, of course. Yorkshire in the 1930s versus Winnipeg in the 90s and 2000s is not a great comparison. But yeah, so it did kind of set me on a back foot a little bit, and also that whole that we talked about, whole human interaction and so on. I guess I've become more extroverted over time, but it's not actually my fundamental nature. So that was also, okay, there are things that I just didn't expect. But I carried on. And actually in the most recent book, the one that's coming out in the fall, there's a story called James and I, where I really explore the parallels, because there are a number of parallels in our lives as well. And our lives as veterinarians and our lives as writers. So look forward to that. there's more on that. And his new series is really, if anybody hasn't seen it, here's a plug for NPR. It's fantastic. It really holds its own. And I'll get less young people asking me who he is, because actually the first editor, one of the younger editors that looked at Accidental Veterinarian, said, "You better explain who this is, because I don't know who this is." I was, what? Are you serious?
There's always that, but I agree with the new series. It's very good.
I have another reader question. I've been reading a lot about empathy in animals, and I'm wondering, since you encounter so many animals so frequently, what your thoughts are on our emotional, empathetic capabilities of our furry friends.
I'm sure they have them. There's no reason to believe that they don't. Humans, it's always a mistake. Whenever we think of something that's special about humans, science has refuted it, like everything. It's just a matter of degree and context and so forth. So absolutely they have empathy. They just may not always read situations the same way we do and express empathy in the same way we do. So I think there's a lot of room for misinterpretation, us misinterpreting what we think is empathy on their part and missing it when it actually is empathy on their part. But again and again, I mean, it's anecdote, but there's so many anecdotes, clients telling me, when I'm feeling down or when something bad's happened, my dog comes and gives me, or my cat comes and gives me extra comfort at that time. They're real emotional radars. Language is a beautiful thing that we have, our spoken language, but it's made us lose touch a little bit with our ability to communicate properly through body language and through emotion. And animals are fantastic at that. That's what they really do well, is communicating at that level. We're kind of the ignorant ones in that regard.
Yeah. And I always wonder too about how much we project onto animals.
Sure.
Like there's always debates all the time about like whether or not dogs get jealous, for example.
Yeah. I think, we do project, but again, they do feel all those emotions, just maybe not when we think they're feeling them. I think we misread it, because we are projecting in it. If I were the dog, I would feel this way in this circumstance. Well, not necessarily, but.
This is sort of another question in that vein. This reader says it's a silly question. I disagree with you, reader. I think it's a good question. Can all dogs see TV? Google seems to imply they can, but I've only had one that seemed to truly watch and actually had to turn the channel during some shows and a lot of commercials.
Yeah, so they see TV. I'm sure they do. I just don't think they care a lot of the time. So it doesn't have a smell. So dogs understand the world entirely, but mostly through smell. I'm going to see this again and again when dogs go blind. It's routine for me to have a blind dog come in and the owners are not aware the dog has gone blind, because as long as you don't rearrange the furniture, the dog still navigates. They have as much brain power proportionally devoted to decoding smell signals as we have to visual signals, and vice versa. So
interesting.
We live in a visual space, they live in a smell space. So for a lot of dogs, it doesn't smell like anything. It's not 3D. It's up there on the wall. It's a picture that moves, right? So they, so I think a more interesting question for me in some ways is those dogs that do like the TV, what's going on there? Like, what are they? What's going on in their heads? What are they reacting to? But yeah, I think it's the norm for them not to, because they just don't care. It's not that interesting.
Yeah. My dog, Samson, will watch shows that have dogs in them.
Okay.
Like the movie Frankenweenie, for example, which is an animated dog. He was
Yeah, it's not doesn't really look like a dog.
and sounds, but he doesn't care if dogs are barking. But if there's like a puppy whining or in distress, he's on it, like full head tilting, like really listening carefully.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting.
So interesting how they're all different.
Cats are similar too, more attracted to motion. And we've had one of our cats that went up and did the look at the TV and then look around the back of the TV and check it out. And then after, you can tell the thought process is going on. I mean, they're actively thinking, because at that point, the animal that went across the screen didn't go anywhere. It's not behind there. This isn't real. The cat walked away, never watched TV again.
This is the last reader question I had. Are there species of animals that are more difficult to conduct exams and surgeries on, either in an anatomical sense or biological sense?
Yeah. So it depends on who you are. So there are veterinarians that will happily, very comfortably do all kinds of species. So I can, but there are some physical, technical limitations. Birds are a little tricky. There are people that are really good with birds, but it's very tricky to safely administer anesthetic for some technical physiological reasons. There are reptiles are difficult to keep safely under anesthetic as well, and difficult to monitor safely under anesthetic. And some animals are just difficult to handle. There's actually in the last book, there is a story about parrots and how I'm deathly afraid of parrots. I can't read them properly. And those beaks, you want to have an entertaining evening, look up the fingers being bitten off by parrots. It's a thing. So it's an alarming thing. So yeah, they're for a variety of reasons, there are pets, there are species that are more difficult. And we just have less knowledge about a lot of the exotic species. There just has been less work done. But the more and more, like rabbits have moved into the mainstream just in the last 5 years or so. Rabbits are now like a regular pet, like dogs and cats, where we have lots of skills and knowledge and ability. It used to be really difficult to do certain things with rabbits because nobody had the skills, but now that's pretty mainstream in the profession, I would say. Not every veterinarian, but most bigger clinics will have somebody that does. So maybe the birds that's coming and the reptiles that's coming, people have more comfort with them, more ability to deal with their issues.
How much commonality is there between species? Can you take some experience?
So mammals are all very similar. On the inside, it's amazing. I do lots of ultrasound, and people are always amused by how people are. Wow, they've got kidneys. Yeah. They look just like human kidneys. Yeah, they do. So yeah, on the inside, it's within a class. So all mammals are very similar. Birds are very similar. So you can extrapolate a fair bit, and that's a lot of veterinary medicine. It's mostly mammal medicine. Is extrapolation. So when we get weird things in, if there's no literature, then we can extrapolate. The zoo vets are great at that. That's their forte, right? And then, amongst reptiles, you can extrapolate to some extent, and amongst birds, you can extrapolate. But between, no, you can't. It's much easier to go from human to dog to rat than any of those to, macaw or python. That doesn't work.
That makes sense. I wanted to ask about how you balance your work and writing. Like, what does it, like, do you write every day? Do you have are you one of those people that gets up early in the morning? Like, what's kind of your writing life and your work life?
So my superpower is working less. So I'm just in the clinic 3 days a week right now, 3, sometimes 4. I mean, they're long days and so forth. And because I have a management role, a lot of it spills into my free time. But Thursdays are my sort of boundaried writing day. In 2015, I was at that point decided, I was 25 years in practice then, I would carve out a writing day, and that would be my day, Thursdays, and no errands for the kids or anything. That all happens other times. So, and I'm a bit of an ethnic stereotype. So I'm German, Canadian, and I'm pretty disciplined. Like, I just set a goal, 3,000 words a week, and I write 3,000 words a week. I just do it. And I do all that on Thursdays, and in 1,000-word bursts. And then I walk a lot, and walking generates the story. And then I just have to transfer it onto the keyboard. I'm a really fast one-finger typer. So it comes out pretty clean from my head onto the keyboard. So that's all done just musing while I'm walking, and then I write.
Yeah.
That works for me.
That's amazing. 2,000 words a week. Writing is my literal job, and I don't think I write That's many words a week.
Well, now I know why we've seen 5 books in 3 years.
This is right.
Well, I mean, there's vacation weeks and so on, so you can't do 52 times 3. Where I'd be coming out with even more, but no, yeah, but most of the time, yeah, 3,000 words a week.
And you read too, you said. So
Yeah.
you have authors that are go-tos or?
No, I do read. I read really, really widely. I'm just bit of a throwback just right now reading The Name of the Rose, Umberto Eco. It's kind of a mystery element to it. I'm enjoying that. I'm just started The Magician by Colm Toibin about Thomas Mann, his life story. So it just depends. And before that, I read Simon Winchester's Land, which I highly recommend as a nonfiction read. Yeah, again, you just chip away at it like an hour every evening and it gets done. Not like it's a chore, but I love it. It's integral to my life, keeps me sane-ish.
Well, I think that's a good stopping point for the discussion. That 45 minutes just blew right by. Holy cow. I just want to thank all of you so much for your time tonight. Jen for hosting, and Chris for being here consistently, and Philip for your time and for being part of this book club. It's been such a nice sort of pick-me-up to have a little bit of a lighter read. We've been reading a lot of really heavy stuff this year, so this is like the perfect little deviation from that. So thank you so much for that. And before we go, we're going to talk a little bit about next month's pick, which is Life in the City of Dirty Water by Clayton Thomas Mueller. This is a memoir. I am going to do a bit of a content warning on this one. There is some depictions of sexual abuse and violence and other things that could trigger folks, but if you are able to read it, please do. It's such an inspiring, wonderful story. Clayton was born in Winnipeg, talks about his life and his traumas and his moving away from gangs and drugs into becoming an incredible Indigenous activist, a climate crisis activist. It was on the Canada Reads list this year. It was shortlisted for McNally Robinson's Book of the Year for the Book Awards. It's a national bestseller. Like, I could go on and on. It's an amazing book. So we're really, really privileged to have Clayton with us next month. And Egon Sinclair is going to be hosting that meeting as the Free Press contingent. I think that's everything on my list. So thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Philip and Jen and Chris. And we will see you all again next month.
Bye-bye. Thank you.